This week on Information Technology Leaders, Alex St. John, President, CEO, and co-founder of WildTangent. Now, here's your host, Laura Schildkraut.
Today's guest has been named by Ziff-Davis as one of the most influential people in multimedia. He is a lead character in Michael Drummond's book, Renegades of the Empire, which details his impact in building Direct X and Chromeffects while at Microsoft. He has since left Microsoft to start his own company, aptly named WildTangent. In the book, Drummond described him as a rogue soldier who didn't understand how to follow orders and never paid much attention to chain of command, an articulate nerd who could charm even better than he could code. Upon meeting him, I found him to be brilliant, fearless, irreverent, engaging, warm, and not a little bit scary. Please welcome Alex St. John.
Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska. I grew up on an island called, well, actually, we spent our summers in Fairbanks, but I grew up on the island called St. George Island, which was a volcano in the Bering Sea, largely populated by seals and barren of most vegetation.
Not too many people?
Not too many people, just the Aleuts who were there to beat the seals pretty much during, pup season.
And what was your parents' idea of daycare?
Oh, yes, well, my grandmother was there, so they were bush teachers, which meant that they went and taught the Aleut school children our Western ways while I was at home with my grandmother and my younger sister, and we played with sea balls that washed up from Japan, Japanese fishing nets. Some of them been at sea for 50 years by the time they reached the beaches there.
Didn't you also spend a lot of time at the library?
Yeah, in the summer, my father was working on a PhD at the University of Alaska. And so I was largely home educated. I don't have much formal schooling, and I did spend most of my summer just at the university playing on the old Honeywell computer system and reading books at the library.
Do you remember your 13th birthday present?
My 13th birthday present? Not offhand. You'd have to refresh me.
I believe they got you your first personal computer.
Oh boy, was it that? God, yeah, there was a. Yeah, I started coding on the Honeywell when I was 11. I think the Commodore VIC-20 must have come out about then. And that was definitely my first home computer. And I was raised in a log cabin. The first, God knows, 10, 11 years of my life, there were no power. Fortunately, the more modern cabins in Fairbanks had electricity, so my parents got me a Commodore VIC-20, and I spent most of my winter writing vocabulary programs for myself.
And what happened when you applied to the University of Alaska for college?
Well, I'd spent 16 years pretty much in very remote places. I didn't have a high school degree or a diploma or anything of that nature. And my parents had moved back to Massachusetts when I was about 16. I didn't take well to public schools, and I dropped out and rode a motorcycle back to Canada. And I really wanted to go to college, and I didn't have SATs or grades or anything useful to fall back on, so I had to test into the university, which means I had to convince them that I took the SATs and the ACTs, and then talked my way into it with a lot of counselors there. And I actually taught computer-aided design and was a nodie on the Honeywell system to pay for my education there.
And where did you eventually end up going to school?
I spent about 18 months. I did 3 semesters at the University of Alaska, and my wife at the time wanted to move back to the lower 48, as we called it, and I really wanted to go to MIT. That had always been a dream. So I took a job at a company called Hell Graphic Systems, was my first job, as a support engineer. And they promised me, we'll right down the hall from MIT, we have scholarship programs, all of that sort of thing. So I thought that was my mechanism to be able to afford to go to school like that. It didn't quite work out that way.
So you never did end up getting that degree?
I never got a college degree. I don't even have a high school diploma.
Does that bother you?
No, not anymore. When I was young and didn't know, you don't know what you want or what you're going to become when you're a kid. And I certainly had no idea. So I was very worried about it at that age. But, a few years later, I was making a ton of money at Microsoft and running very large engineering teams and producing enormous bodies of technologies, and you know what? Nobody gave a damn anymore.
Doesn't seem to matter.
No, doesn't matter.
Well, while you were at Hell Graphics, you had an epiphany. What was the epiphany from Hell?
Oh God, there were a number of epiphanies there. I think one of the most things, I was coming out of the bush, and I was very, I had no context. I didn't, have ordinary other kids to hang around with or anything of that nature. So I was eternally paranoid that I wasn't prepared for the working world or wasn't educated enough or anything of that nature. And so when I got this job as a support engineer at Hell, I was very, very eager to prove myself. And I really had no idea. And I think one of the first things I realized, I remember the first day I was there, my new manager handed me a red book, 1987, 86 copy of the PostScript red book. And he said, can you program? I go, yeah, I know some programming languages. He goes, well, can you learn PostScript? I said, sure. I went home, I read the book, I practiced with it a little bit, came in the next day and said, yeah, I know PostScript. And he laughs, yeah, that's cute. Anyway, go and we have this fellow over here has been learning PostScript for years, and he's an expert on it. He's been to all the Adobe training. We want you to work with him for a while so you really master it. And this was a gray-haired guy. He'd been an engineer for a long time. I was quite awestruck. This is what seasoned nerds look like. And as soon as that was true, I was very intimidated, and I went in and I would look over his shoulder and see. I go, "What are you working on?" He goes, "Well, I'm trying to work on this matrix problem, this and that." And I said, "Well, you do that." And he was like, "Oh." And within a couple of weeks, he was constantly asking me back to his office to help him with problems. And it took me a while to realize, hey, wait a minute, I know this better than he does. And that was the first kind of early inklings that, hey, I might actually be competent at this. I think I had a number of interesting experiences there, but you tell me which ones you might be most interested in.
Well, actually, I wanted you to talk a little bit about your manager, because you said that your manager was sort of a role model. What did you learn from him?
His name was Rick LaRoche, and he was first he was a very relaxed guy, and I worked literally 140 hours a week. I'd go for days without sleep. I'd be at the office all the time because I was very driven and I think very insecure about my experience. And he took me to a show, and this was a German company, and I love working with the Germans. And he took us to a show that was run by the Germans from Hell Graphic Systems, brought their computer systems in, $1 million setup and so forth. And I was to train with Dan Lorenzini, who was an expert in New York on how to use these systems because I needed to become familiar with them. And he brought me down to train, and they had this set up on an old Apollo workstation. And Dan Lawrence, the Germans were all bustling around. They had major customers coming. Everybody was very uptight. And Dan's trying to show me how the system works while we're there. And in the middle of showing it to me, this senior VP of sales comes up and he goes, "Dan, I got a very important customer. It's a $3 million sale. I need you to come and talk to the guy, and then we're going to give him a demo of this new system." And Dan said, "Oh, cool. I'll be right back." And he leaves me at the computer. And he went off to talk to these guys. And while I'm sitting there with my hands in my lap doing nothing, the computer crashes. And they're still talking over there, and this thing is just locked up. Takes, about 10 minutes to reboot an Apollo workstation when it's gone down that way. So I go, oh my goodness, an important customer? They're going to be over here in a second? The system, product we're going to show them just blew up in front of me? I'll fix it. Reached over, reboot the computer. It's going to be fine. I'd done it on this system a dozen times before. Started up again, took my hands back. Two of these German guys, German engineers, going to be, "What are you doing?" I go, "Hi, the system crashed because it's, oh my God, he rebooted the computer. What are you doing? Don't you see there's a customer coming over here?" And they started screaming and throwing up their hands and pointing at me. And the sales guy comes over and he throws me off the floor. "Get out of here." And I went to my hotel room and I was just devastated. That was it. There went my career. I'm gone, So I was just crushed, and Rick LaRoche, I'll never forget this, he called me up and he said, and he said, "Boy, Alex, I heard you created quite a scene down there." And I go, "I just rebooted the computer. They, and I explained what happened. And he goes, "Well, what did you learn from that?" And he goes, "I don't know, Rick. Don't work with Germans." And he says, "I think probably what you learned is, you're the new guy, and, they don't know who you are. So even though you did the right thing, you're going to get burned for that in that situation." And he goes, "I'm not going to fire you for making a mistake. I'm going to fire you for making it a second time." And he goes, "And better yet, you learn from other people's mistakes." And he was very much that way. And so he was very good at managing. And he was looking for, smart kids who had that kind of motivation. And he handled that very well. So, years later, when I'm managing 132 people, and a lot of them were kids like I was then, I think a lot about how he handled me in some of those situations when I draw back on that experience, because he's by far the best manager I'd ever encountered since then.
Why did you eventually leave Hell Graphics?
Well, let's see. There are so many reasons. They were bought by Linotype, which was also a German company. And I was told that the smart kid who wanted to work in research and development needed to move to Kiel, Germany, to work in R&D. And the prospect of being blessed with so much German accompaniment at that time caused me to go, thanks, I quit. And I'd actually started a project there. I'd built their Harlequin PostScript RIP system with a little English company. And as soon as I resigned, this company contacted me. And they moved me to England, and I worked at Harlequin building their PostScript RIP products, which were a clone of Adobe's PostScript language. And that was a very educational experience as well.
What was the main thing you learned during that time?
At Harlequin? Oh, I learned so many things. Harlequin was a very interesting company because it was run by an English PhD mathematician. And this guy was or a jerk, something of that nature. I mean, he was just, and definitely not widely liked. But at that time in history, there was no venture capital, there was no startup funding. I mean, this company existed by the pure strength of his will. And we were all packed together in a room, 10 by 10, 9 people would be packed in this space. And it was pure innovation. It was pure, we are going to build a new way to do professional printing and graphics. And we had to innovate or die. There was no other funding for the company except to be very successful at this. And so I learned a lot about what it meant to absolutely bootstrap a successful startup. You know, this guy's temperament, which I was younger and failed to appreciate as much as I do now. I still may have regarded him with some resentment, but I don't know another way that he could have done that in Cambridge, England, in those kind of economic circumstances. And the company built from 30, we missed our first payroll the first month I was there, to 300 people. Yeah. And based on technologies that I built with my current CFO, Jeremy Kenyon, and I built those RIP products together. And it was amazing seeing technology we made turn into a $40 million business. And that was a fabulous experience. I was there for about 2 years.
And why did you eventually leave that company?
Well, I could only stay in the UK and work for a short period of time, so I was sent to open the US office. And at the US office, I didn't have teams of engineers making fun technology with. And so that wasn't as much fun, being in a kind of remote, what was going to be a sales office, really. And so we had Harlequin at that time had an enormous number of new customers using their products. And they were eager to pay me lots of money to come and consult for them. So I left Harlequin and said, well, I'm going to go be a consultant. And that was also an education experience. I learned that being paid a lot of money is not as glamorous as it sounds, because you get the work nobody else wants to do. So I was a consultant for just about 6 months.
And then Microsoft kind of came courting.
Yeah.
And your first interview at Microsoft was supposed to be a no-pressure experience. What did that end up being like?
That was interesting. Well, I was very proud of myself for making lots of money consulting. I was making $85 an hour, and I was about 24 at the time. And, I work whatever hours I like. They threw you out. This was a hardware company, DCRM. They threw me out at 5 p.m., which drove me insane. The thing I hated most about being a consultant was having to stop working at 5. And Microsoft sent a recruiter to contact me, because I had written a couple articles on PostScript for Color Publishing and Siebold, so my name was in some of these magazines associated with Harlequin's PostScript products. And they called me up and said, "Hi, are you Alex St. John?" I go, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, we would like to talk to you about getting a job at Microsoft." I was like, Microsoft's cool. I had a lot of respect. And it was funny because Microsoft is the evil empire today. In my day, IBM was the evil empire, and Bill Gates was a hero to nerds everywhere for cracking this giant monolithic, monopoly with kids of that time. And so, Gates was I regarded him highly, but I don't want to work on spreadsheets and databases. And I said, no, thank you. I'm making lots of money, doing really well. And they called again. "We want to talk to you. Really want to come?" Well, I may have told you no. They go, "Well, just come and meet with us in Boston. 10 minutes, just to chat." All right, sure. And I drove down to Boston and met with a recruiter from Microsoft. And I thought, I'm going to be interviewed. I'm going to be, ground down. And she just said, "What do you like to do?" I go, "I'm adventurous. I like to do something exciting." She goes, what drives you? And I said, I like making technology. I like succeeding. She goes, that's fine. We'd like to fly into Redmond next week. I go, what, that's it? She goes, yeah. I go, well, I told you I don't really want a job there. She goes, it's a vacation. We'll pay for the trip. Come and spend a weekend. We'll put you up in a nice apartment. Bring your wife. Have a wonderful time. All we ask is Friday, you do a day of interviews. Have the whole weekend on us. No obligation. Oh, well, give me a trip to Seattle. I've never been there before. Sure. So, oh, man. Joining Microsoft is like becoming one with the Borg. I was assimilated very aggressively and systematically. I flew in there, and I didn't want the job. I was like, yeah, I'm here for the free vacation. So I didn't know much about Microsoft's culture. I didn't, usually I wore a suit every day to work at Hell. And so I wore a t-shirt and shorts and went into my interview, and I interviewed with Cameron Myhrvold, who's Nathan Myhrvold's brother, and they put me through 11 interviews with all these people. And I would say things like, I go, so what am I interviewing for? And nobody'd answer. They go, well, we have a number of positions that we're interested in you for. Well, I go, well, why would you hunt me down if there are a number of positions? They go, well, just talk to these people. And I did these 11 interviews. It was grueling. And you'd have, I'd have Ken Fowles, one of the evangelists, would say, how would you invent a remote control, a better remote control for a TV? And then I'd ask another guy who was brandishing a Bowie knife in a closed office while he's interviewing me, would say things like, what do you really know well? What's the neatest thing you've ever coded? And I'd say, well, I wrote a real-time little mini kernel for DOS. And he goes, really? Well, what's the interrupt timer number interrupt for DOS? And I'd been 2 years since I'd done this. And I go, 1C. And he goes, that's right. I realized, I just go, what's the thing you think you know best? And I'm going to test you on it. And then they ask you the puzzle questions, and why is a manhole cover round, and all the variations on that. And I got interesting questions from Cameron, where he'd say, he goes, do you like working with people? I go, no, not really. I'm not much of a people person. And he goes, oh, good. And after this, Doug Henrich called me at my hotel and wanted to have breakfast. And I said, so what was that all about? And he goes, well, we'd like to hire you to be a technical evangelist. I go, well, what's that? And he goes, well, your job is to promote Microsoft technologies. In what area? Well, publishing. We'd like you to be a publishing evangelist. And I go, well, what would I do? Well, you would go out and you'd get people to use Microsoft's publishing technology. I go, well, I'll have to think about that. And he said, by the way, our Christmas party is tonight, and Ken Fowles, one of the evangelists there, wants to know if you'll go. And he took me, and I said, well, sure, I'll think about it. And Ken Fowles took me to this Christmas party, and they had rented the whole Seattle Convention Center here. And they had balloon castles 100 feet tall in the 1920s Sunday-making speakeasy in a whole room with arcades, and they had a monster mash room and bands playing, and they'd built a circus, and they had 7-nation cuisine, and everybody was juggling and swallowing torches, and, well, I mean, not the guests. And you checked your children at the door with your coat and got a pager for them, and clowns took them off to another party. And I saw that, and I was just like, holy cow. This, I said, I don't care what the job is. I don't care that I don't understand. I want to know what makes a company like this. And so I accepted a job there for a fraction of the money that I was making, and I moved out to Seattle. And it was a very interesting experience being interviewed.
And what did you learn from Michael Windsor about being an evangelist?
Michael Windsor, see, I didn't really, Cameron said to me, I said, what does an evangelist do? And he goes, well, you can't actually recruit them. We kind of have to make them. So we're looking for a certain kind of people. And they, when you're a new evangelist, they hook you up with a mentor. And they hooked me up with Michael Windsor, this tall, thin guy with, kind of California blonde. And he wore nothing but day-glow suits. Day-glow orange, day-glow green, lavender. And this guy was flamboyant. And he would take me on the road. And I did this with a couple of evangelists. And I could not believe my eyes and ears, because they'd go into a company. They'd say, we're going into this company, and we're meeting with a CEO, and our goal with this company is to persuade him to use this technology. And Windsor would go in, he'd meet with the CEO, he'd have a presentation with a number of employees, and he'd explain the technology and do a pitch. Then he'd sit with the CEO, and he'd answer questions, and he'd say, I'll have you sent this, we'll provide you this much training, we'll do these marketing campaigns if you guys do a press release announcing da-da-da. And he'd do this in his day-glow suit and what have you, and just, everything seemed perfectly normal while this was going on. And this guy seemed like he knew everything. There was nothing he couldn't answer. And so I was very impressed. I was like, holy cow. Because, I was a Mac programmer at the time. I'd only done a little Windows programming. And I had no idea, how am I ever going to learn all of this? And I very quickly, after a few weeks, I realized that not only was Michael Windsor brilliantly articulate, he was also full of He just winged that stuff, and he did it with amazing finesse. And he talked to the marketing people, he would talk to the engineers, and he'd talk to the business people, and he'd change the way he conveyed himself with every one of them. And a lot of the evangelists were like that. They were very technical, very charismatic, and their job was to change an industry, to say, I want your company dependent on my technology, and I'm going to persuade you to do it, and I'm going to help you do it, whatever it takes. And so it was a very fun job. I got to do a lot of reinventing of the Windows architecture, Windows printing architecture, doing that. Because the other job was to take it back to engineers. Microsoft's very secular, a very closed environment. The engineers are, in many respects, very detached from the rest of the world. So one of my jobs was, they'd say, go in and persuade the engineers to do the right thing. Well, how? I'm not an executive. I don't just do this thing, engineers. They don't listen to you. Same thing you do with everybody else. Persuade them. So my job was to do the same thing inside the company as was outside. He goes, this is what the market needs in order for us to capture the publishing market from Apple. So you guys need to build this and build that and what have you, and if you don't agree with me, I'm going to persuade you. And so a lot of the Windows print system in modern Windows 95 and 98 was built that way from just influence. That was a fascinating process.
While you were the publishing evangelist, you were dealing with some of the challenges of Windows 3.1. You ended up talking to the press, and that ended up becoming your first conversation with Bill Gates.
Yeah.
Want to tell us about that?
Well, I got about 3 months into Microsoft. I had one of those Rick LaRoche German situations on my hands. I got Doug Henrich, who'd hired me, comes in and he goes, yeah, I've got a journalist from InfoSpace wanting to talk about Windows 95, Chicago's print architecture, and I want you to talk to him about it. Okay. I'd never spoken to the press before. I'd never dealt with hostile press or anything of that nature. I take this call, and the guy says, well, so Windows 3.1's not very competitive against the Mac for publishing architecture. And I go, and he goes, so I go, yeah, it's got some problems. We definitely have to reinvent the way Windows prints in order to be competitive. So I had that kind of conversation with him. I was perfectly clear and frank and what have you. And a day later, within a couple of days, an issue comes out of InfoSpace on the front cover, Microsoft executive, and that's the first time I discovered that everybody who talks to the press at Microsoft is a Microsoft executive. Microsoft executive says Windows print architecture broken. Microsoft executive Alex St. John says the Windows 3.1 print architecture is broken, not competitive with the Macintosh, and Microsoft's going to have to reinvent that architecture in order to be competitive, blah, 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 blah. And Gates sent me an email. I guess you walk in your mailbox in the morning, and there he is. Bill Gates, that's a joke, of course. Have you ever heard of PR? What were you saying to these people? First of all, and then he goes, our print architecture is not inferior to the Mac's. It's superior to anything Apple's ever had. What are you talking about? And boy, I was taken aback. And my managers all came hustling in the office with this sort of ashen look, like, boy, it was nice working with you, Alex. Once again, I had one of these sort of moments where, that's it. That's the end of my job at Microsoft. I pissed off Gates all over the newspapers. I'm a Microsoft executive quoted for saying our technology sucks. And I thought I was going to be fired, and I was very upset, and I took a walk around campus. Microsoft campus is beautiful. I got, it's like a park, paths all around it, and I took a walk around it, and I sort of stepped it up from being really upset and going, oh my God, I'm going to have to move back, and I wonder if my consulting job's still available, and da-da-da. And then you kind of come around, and I started realizing as I got about halfway around, wait a minute, what's he saying? Because I was honest, and yeah, I shouldn't have said that to the press. I had no idea. I'd never been press trained or something like that before, but it is broken. What's he talking about? It's the Mac's better. I know it's broken. I'm an expert on this. So I got back to my office, and I go, well, I'm fired anyway. Why don't I tell Bill what I think? Bill? You don't know what you're talking about. It's the most embarrassing thing I've ever done. How do you expect me to be a publishing evangelist with this kind of crap technology? Because everybody I've got to persuade knows it's garbage. And then here are the reasons why for about 3 pages.
Send.
Yeah, send. There. Now I can go back to the East Coast feeling vindicated. And Gates takes that mail and forwards it to just about every senior executive in the company. Hey, look what the new guy has to say about what you guys have been telling me all this time. Doesn't say it that way, but that was the gist. And I get mail from Brad Silverberg going, what the hell are you saying to Gates? And Silverberg runs the Windows 95 OS team, And, what are you saying to Gates? And I said, well, it's broken. It's like, you'll go through me. You don't go telling Bill that my architecture, if you've got something, you don't know what you're talking about. And then I have the email exchange, yes, I do. And so I got into one of those classic Microsoft email flaming battles. And the outcome of which was that the Windows architecture got printed. Nobody got changed. I handled the relationships with Adobe. In fact, I hired some of the people who led those organizations. Nobody anywhere in the operating system groups who had anything to do with printing would make a major decision without consulting me, going, "Hey, Alex, what do you think of this?" So it was very scary, and it came out well in the end. I discovered, boy, if you want to be successful at Microsoft, you tell it like it is, and you stick behind your guns, and you be right. So I learned a lot from that experience, because I definitely learned that if you want to be successful, possibly at any company, but certainly at Microsoft, you can't be a fainting flower, and you can't be insecure about what you stand for. And I got quite a ways on that, not all the way, but.
You also became known for some bold product launches. Want to tell us about one of your favorites?
Yeah, bold is generous. Others would call them insane. Microsoft had, the evangelism team was also really focused on competitive things. They'd worry about who's got superior technology, and how are we positioned, and how do we make our technology competitive. And they had 8 people worried about Apple's leadership in multimedia. 8 evangelists whose job it was to make sure that Windows was better at playing multimedia apps. And at the time, Windows had 65 multimedia titles, and they were all authored with Macromedia Director. And it was a race. Microsoft had been in it for years, going, we've got to make a better video player than Apple. That was what multimedia was who can play video better, because we don't want Apple to get a foothold on our platform. And I had always, liked video games. And an opening came up. They said, hey, we'd like a game evangelist. And I think the intention for the role was just go, hey, let's make sure that Windows 95 works okay for some of those DOS games. And I applied for that position, and I very quickly came to the conclusion that Windows was a lousy platform for games. And I wasn't one of those people sort of to go, well, if we could get a couple leading titles up, that would be nice, job done. I've always been a megalomaniac. And so I said, in order to get the entire game market off of DOS onto Windows, in order to really make Windows a leading multimedia platform, one, stop trying to play leapfrog with Apple. Why don't you redefine multimedia to be something they can't play at? They just can't be as good as we are at it. And then video will be a minor subset of that definition of multimedia. And I proposed Direct X. I wrote a big thing called Taking Fun Seriously, and I submitted all the executives. I spent weeks writing this brilliant proposal with a couple good friends of mine, who are all CEOs of their own companies now and were also evangelists. A lot of evangelists had that sort of that CEO tendency over time. And these made this huge, thick document, and I research and appendixes, and is this a great argument for why we should do this? Sent it up the executive chain and got a thank you for your input. So after that, I was, and then again I go, well, we're not going to do it, so why am I a game evangelist? And then again, that sort of instinct, well, screw it, I'm going to make this anyway. I rounded up a couple friends, and we built Direct X. We did it with no budget. We didn't have any resources. We didn't have permission. It wasn't part of the operating system early on. It was just something we made. Say, here's how games should work on this platform. And as you know, when Microsoft didn't ship DirectX, people widely perceived that it was going to be that was part of the OS. It wasn't shipped by Microsoft until 3 generations later, when it went out with Windows 98. It was the first time Microsoft shipped it with a major OS. So it was years before DirectX. Actually, it went out with NT4. Excuse me. DirectX 2 did, or 3, and so it was carried around by all the games that used it. And in 1995. When I'd been out persuading all these game companies to move from DOS to DirectX, and the game developers hated Microsoft. I mean, they'd do Darth Vader impressions when I came into a meeting. I'd go, hi, I'm from Microsoft, I'm here to help you, and they'd just crack up. Yeah, all right. We are never moving to Windows. We hate you. We hate Microsoft. Your operating system is slow. It's broken. It's bloated. It sucks up all the memory. 2 years later, no game company would ever imagine building a game on anything but Windows. And it was a very interesting transition to live through, and it was my job to persuade that transition to occur. And one of the things I did was throw these huge launch parties for the technology. I said, this is the game industry. What are you going to do? Set up some trade show booths and go, game technology is good, So for the launch of DirectX games for the Christmas '95 season, got all the companies and hardware companies I'd persuaded to support DirectX, and all the game companies I'd persuaded to make DirectX games, and I rented. I persuaded Microsoft to allow me to use an underground parking garage in a new building they were building, much to Patty Stonecipher's chagrin, which was another story. And we built a haunted house in this parking garage with id Software makes Doom, and the guy Activision doing Mortal Kombat. And, no, not Activision, it was Acclaim. And Activision did Pitfall Harry, and all these game companies came in. They built sections of the haunted house, and we strung them together. We had 3,000 people come, and I invited id. We ported Doom to Windows, and invited id to run their first Doom tournament, where, at Microsoft's campus, the final tournament. And I had 239 journalists there, and we had a volcano built in the middle of Patty Stonecipher's new cafeteria, which she wasn't thrilled about because they had to eat boxed lunches that week. And it had an elevator up through the middle and shot smoke out of it, and we rose out of the stage dressed in these demonic costumes and, would announce these tournaments and so forth. And there were 2 huge stages, and the gamers would play Doom, against each other on the big screen. And I persuaded Bill to, much to the PR department's chagrin, to be blue screened into Doom. So there's a shot, this is the videotape, which is very hard to find. We got Bill in a trench coat with a double-barrel shotgun. And another story is how that film got done. It was very funny, but it's basically his face making little faces down the Doom thing, going through the level and killing all the monsters. Then he literally walks into the game, turns around with a shotgun, and starts talking about Windows as a great gaming platform. And while he's talking, one of the Doom monsters runs out, little bitmap thing comes out. Hey, Bill, can I have an autograph? And he blows it away with a shotgun, says, "Don't interrupt me while I'm speaking." And that was played to these 3,000 people, and then the tape was quickly lost thereafter. And so it was a phenomenally successful event, and it kind of resonated across the industry. And I had a Pax Romana, a Roman orgy party at the GDC. We did a Ground Zero nuclear Holocaust-themed party with lab coats and radiation badges and so forth at another one of the developer conferences. And these events drew thousands of people from the game industry. And those crazy events had a lot to do with driving their awareness and the perception of the technology early on.
Yet after about 5 years, you kind of set out to get yourself fired.
Yeah.
Why did you do that, and how did you do that?
It really started after that 3rd month when, when you came to the conclusion, I'm dead, I'm fired, then I might as well say what's on my mind. That stuck with me for years afterwards. And it was a tremendous battle because, Microsoft's got a lot of very smart people, a lot of very aggressive people. It's a very busy place. And it's pretty hard to stand out there, and it's pretty hard to say, hey, I'm making something that everybody's going to use, and it's not in anybody's playbook, and it's not in any schedule, and nobody wants it, and we're going to do it anyway, and to pull that off. And so I ended up in a great deal of internal conflict and politics and so forth, along with the 2 other gentlemen, Eric Engstrom and Craig Eisler, who built this platform with me. And it was a very painful process to go through, and you get burned out. I got worn down over the years. I ended up getting divorced over it because I worked all the time. I would literally pass out at my keyboard and go into meetings with key marks on my forehead, which I would get mocked for. So I was burned out. I was tired of fighting all the time. I burned a lot of bridges, and sufficiently so that now they write books about it. And so I really wanted it to end, and I felt very committed to the technology. I felt a really strong sense of commitment to the community I'd built around it, and I didn't want to see anybody screwing it up. And I felt like I couldn't quit because I'm just that kind of workaholic, compulsive maniac. And I really, at the same time, I wanted out. And so I got myself in enough trouble that I was ultimately fired in June of 1997 for an interchange over Direct 3D versus OpenGL. Direct 3D was, the 3D standard for Direct 3D, or for 3D on the PC that was competing with the OpenGL standard. And I got into one of those email exchanges that was enough to finally get me executed by Paul Moritz. It was a very executive level decision. But I walked out of Microsoft feeling 100 pounds lighter because it had been such a trial. A fabulous experience, best one of my life, but I definitely wouldn't necessarily recommend it for everyone.
And what did you do after leaving Microsoft?
Oh, I went scuba diving, did rock climbing. I lost, and since recovered 80 pounds, I misplaced for a year. I traveled around the world. I went to Ireland and Scotland. I got married again. I just had a wonderful time. And I went through a process where I was painting the Sistine Chapel on the ceiling of my apartment when I came to and compulsively day trading. When I came to the conclusion I was out of my mind and needed to be working again. So it was a lot of fun.
So how did WildTangent come about?
Well, it was interesting because I'd love to say, I have this brilliant vision for a company and I'm going to take advantage of this internet boom and raise billions of dollars and go public and what have you. But really, I was pretty much of the opinion that I was retired and done because, I'd made a lot of money in stock options. I didn't ever have to work again. And I'd started a project there with these three friends of mine, these two other friends of mine, called Chromeffects, which the idea was to create a multimedia browser for Windows. And that project, which I did the original prototyping for with these guys, took off at Microsoft after I was gone. And so there were 250 people working on pushing this thing out the door by the time toward the last year of my sabbatical. And Eric Engstrom, who'd become a general manager, he'd been a peon and evangelist like me, had become a general manager at Microsoft, and he was one of the 12 witnesses at Microsoft's DOJ trial, a fitting place for evangelists, I think, called me up and he said, Alex, I want to launch Chromeffects. You're the only guy I know who can launch a technology like this. Could we get you to come back and do it? And I said, well, I don't want to work for Microsoft again, but he said, well, why don't we do a consulting agreement? He goes, I just need Chromeffects demos made, I need marketing materials, I need help launching this thing, promoting it to developers. So, they did some lucrative contracts with us. I called my friend Jeremy Kenyon, who I'd built the Harlequin Rip with, and he moved into my basement. I hired some web people, some smart web kids, and they all lived in my basement. I had 5 employees all living down in my basement working on Chromeffects. And I figured it'd kind of be a short-term gig, we'll make some money. I don't really care about that. I just need to pay my expenses and launch this platform. And we did that for the first couple months, and then they gave us offices at Microsoft, and there were about 8 of us at Microsoft, and we built demos for Balmer, and they'd ask me questions like, well, how should we market the thing? And I said, well, let's see, it's big, it's slow, and it's American-made, and it's loud. It's a Harley. So we came up with this whole Chrome Harley campaign to promote it and so forth, which they were very excited about. And the DOJ trial hits. And this is November of '98. DOJ trial hits, and Microsoft says, hey, we don't want to launch this project. We want to kill it. And so Chrome went away, and I found I had a company, 8 people. Made some good money on Microsoft, but what I could say is, hey, that was fun, see y'all. But that irked me because I thought that Chromeffects, or the idea of a multimedia browser, was such a powerful concept. Of course I would. That I said, if they're not going to do it, this makes sense to do. So then I went out and raised venture capital and started WildTangent formally. So it was WildTangent Consulting before that.
And what is the company's reason for being? How is it structured?
Well, I think the primary reason for the company's existence is my need to be a megalomaniac. No.
But that's not what you tell the VCs.
No. Well, no, they appreciate that, actually, because they know a compulsive workaholic when they see one. They know I'm not going to go, I'm bored, I don't feel like working, But the major reason for being is that I perceive that very much as DirectX is the platform for games in the Windows environment, or interactivity, that there was another market on the internet where it should be possible to build interactive media applications, games, educational titles, and also a lot of commercial applications. It should be possible to build those as web pages and stream them into a web page and deliver those online. And that would fundamentally change the economics of the internet and of the way these kinds of content are made and published. And I thought that was a very important thing to release, and it was extremely technically hard to make. I'd seen a lot of people fail at it, which of course is my rationale for going, I'll show them how this is done. And so it was an idea I was very enamored of. And I believe that, the technology, and it's 3 years later now. My God, the damn thing works. We have, millions of users out there building major movie studios like Time Warner and Sony, launching content on our platform, and they're all streamed web pages written in Java. So it's amazingly rewarding to have an idea like that. Start with a few friends going, let's just try this thing, and have it go to raising $51 million in venture capital. We have 132 employees now, and we have the technology getting adopted by all these companies. Our last round, which I don't know when this TV show airs, but our last round was led by Sony. So it's come a long way in a very short period of time.
During most of your career, you were, to say the least, a management challenge.
Oh, yeah.
Now you've hired people who are probably just like you. How do you sort of create a culture around keeping that balance?
Well, I love to say I do an amazingly wise job of it, but I was the worst handful any manager, and I regret that too. I had some very good people I worked for that I'd really like to go, I'm sorry I did that for you. I was young and crazy. Now I'm old and crazy. And so I did learn a lot about that experience, and I learned a lot about what it's like to be somebody like me, which is just to be, full of energy and like I said, a little off, because, kids don't understand. They don't know what they want. They don't know what they need. The interpretation of, events or what they hear, so forth, they don't have context for it. And the other thing is that a lot of the laws around employment are strange enough, so it's hard to tell people honestly. Maybe illegal to tell them honestly what's going on sometimes. And that's very strange. You can't say, look, I know how you feel about this person, but one, I can't talk about them because they're a coworker, and two, it's none of your business what their compensation might be. That kind of thing is always a strange role to be in, because I've always been very honest, or very direct at least, in how I talk to people. And you get these management challenges, and what I have done is I said, you know what? I identify with these folks, so I can certainly sit down and talk with them. I go, I know where you're coming from, but allow me to share. You're not, 10 years from now, you're going to go, that was good input, but it's not going to do you any good today. And the other thing I do is I look for really good managers, like the people who are good at handling somebody like me, and I hire them. And I, hire some very smart technical people who are much better at managing than I am. And, I go and do my CEO thing, which is talking to the press, guiding overall strategy, choosing the executive team and managing a small set of really smart, responsible people who aren't a handful like I was. And I leave it to the skill sets of people who are much better managers than I am to like I said, keep the kids in line.
You've mentioned on several occasions that recruiting is one of the big opportunities or the big things that you work on. What are some of your favorite interview questions, and what kind of things are you looking for?
Oh, yeah. Well, I can say broadly, because we interview a lot of people, and there's things. I'm an engineer. I'm a nerd at heart. So it's very strange being a CEO and not getting to code anymore. And so, I feel very informed about how to hire an engineer, but I had to hire people like accountants and lawyers and salespeople. I have no idea how to interview some of these folks. And again, my fallback is I'm going to go interview people who do know and listen to them. So that was one piece of wisdom I picked up, was not to believe I had to know everything or figure everything out entirely on my own. And that has helped a lot. When I'm looking for people, you're always looking for intelligence. Because intelligent people, smart people, to start with, you can do more things with them. Direction changes, you got to be fast, events change, and you need people who can go with that. And so you don't always look for somebody who's so specialized at this narrow thing that they're not capable of changing direction or not capable of learning something new. So always looking for smart, because smart can learn something new. So you're looking for the ability to learn. You're looking for creative problem solvers, people who think outside the box, people who don't say, I can't do something, it's too hard. Because that's a very interesting thing. People who say I can't are always right. You can't argue with them. They can't. You need to find people who don't see obstacles and don't see barriers to problems, because those are the people who can figure something out or invent something new. And very often kids are best at that. I mean, we have a lot of our engineers are just kids that never worked on anything before. And they're some of the most productive people we have, because they don't know what's too hard. They don't know what's impossible. They don't know what they can't do. And so you're looking for people who have those characteristics a lot of the time. You're looking for energy. I'm always looking for workaholics, because maybe I'm that way. I had a very interesting conversation with a company that was a competitor of ours that failed recently, and they wanted me to buy their Australian development office. And they had the lead engineer is there in the room while the guy who ran the company is talking to this to me. He says, "You ever had thought of opening an office in Australia? The beaches, the sun, it's a great environment for engineers." I said, "Well, I don't want engineers who are there for beach and chicks. I want engineers who love a rainy, crappy climate, because all they want to do is code all day, and some years from now go move to Australia and be rich and be done." Right? Because the reason I'm sitting here and you're sitting there is that maybe they spent a little too much time on the beach and meeting the pretty girls instead of coding. But there are a lot of companies who don't necessarily have that kind of culture. And some of them are successful, which is a mystery to me, but it occurs. So I'm always looking for people who are very hardworking and dedicated and willing to sacrifice a little now in order to have a lot more in the future. I think some of the questions I like to ask are a number of things. I was telling some folks in the audience earlier. One question you ask is, what do you do in your free time? When you're not working, what do you do? Because, or if you ask an engineer, you say, what do you code in your free time? Not what you did in class, not what you did when, an instructor made you do it. What do you do on your own? Because people who have initiative and people who have drive exhibit that everywhere in their lives. And an engineer, it manifests in form. They go, I wrote this, and I built a game, and I wrote my own spreadsheet, right? People who don't have that don't do things like that in their free time. They watch television, or they don't necessarily have the urge to go and be productive. People who have that are good for a startup, because they'll take on things on board. They may make a big chunk of it their lives, and they'll be very dedicated to it. So you're always looking for a certain kind of energy in people, I think.
You also recently had some employee situations where you ended up having to do a layoff, and I know that that was really painful. Not a lot of people talk about that. Will you kind of tell us what
those
went
suck.
on then?
I don't recommend going through that. You know, and the interesting, most of the internet, companies that are going under right now, they don't have the option to raise money anymore. And they're not, the layoffs they're having are the kind where, well, goodbye, we're dying. And in this case, we raised a bunch of capital. So it was very strange, and I made a mistake too, because we raised our money, and it took 4 months, and it was a battle. We raised $34 million with major investors, and I couldn't have been more excited about that. And you gather the company up, and you go, "We live. We're not going to die. We're going to succeed. We're going to live to fight another day. We will dance on the corpses of no." So you get the company together and you say that, and everybody's spirits soar, and then you have that board meeting, and they go, this is how it is. There is no chance of raising more money in this market, especially at the valuation kind of company you have. That's it. Second, all those grandiose plans and things you sold us on, all the markets you're going to go after, you can't go public just like that on an idea anymore. You actually got to make a business out of this. Not that we were disabused of that notion in the first place, but it means something very different in this market. They go, we want to make sure that money lasts you as long as it's going to take to make this work, because there really isn't. Used to be you could just assume, I'll raise more money, I'll go public, and you'll be set. They said, tell us, Alex, if you need to succeed, what is the narrowest, most refined path for doing that? And then get rid of everybody that's not totally essential to that. And I still control my company, so it's my choice. They don't say, hey, we order you to fire these people. But they say, you probably need to consider doing the right thing to make sure that you don't burn through this money. And, I went away and I realized, I had some of those executive meetings where I go, well, this is the feedback I got. And then you kind of go, again, you have that sort of, boy, that's a really depressing thought, but hey, this is my decision. I can tell them, go to hell, I'm not going to do it. That's my choice. But when you look at the numbers and you do the analysis and you look at your burn rate and you look at what the market's doing and you go, this is exciting. What we're doing is exciting. All the prospects, all the things are great. But we're not going to be profitable tomorrow. And we don't have any guarantees that we're going to be profitable tomorrow, or even as soon as we expect or we hope we're going to be. So we're going to make a really hard decision, and we're going to remove or lay off 18 people, to get our burn rate down under this line, and we're going to be disciplined about sustaining that until we hit the revenue goals, consistently that we think we're going to hit. And then we can grow into those, because that's the responsible thing to do with this money. So I found myself in a period of 2 weeks later having to stand in front of that same set of people and going, I've got some bad news, and the people who are there in the room aren't the people. Those people are gone. They were gone 2 hours earlier. And you don't have the opportunity as CEO to sit down in front of them and say, this isn't because you're a bad person or you're not competent or we don't like you. This isn't political or personal. And I feel like I let you down, and I'm sorry for that. You can't do that. And so what happens is their managers take them aside, sit down with them, say, hey, here's your severance package. Sorry that you're laid off, and goodbye. And I have to sit in my office while this is going on, which again is very, very hard. And then I have to stand in front of everybody who's left with these, traumatized look going, I thought you raised money, I thought we were going to win, and what have you, and say, I had to lay off some people we really liked today. And that's very hard. Some of these people I played games with in the evenings, I'd play Magic with them at night, and I had to say goodbye to them, even though I personally liked them a great deal. And that was really tough. That is the worst thing. Actually, that's the second worst thing to go to. The other one, I claim I'm happy to not have that experience yet, which is probably to have to say goodbye to all of them. And, I feel like I did the right thing, or had to do the right thing in order to ensure that day never comes. But boy, it sure sucks a lot, and so I definitely wouldn't recommend it. And then, I look at a lot of these companies who are out there failing. It's such a hard decision to make that many people can't do it, understandably. And the unfortunate thing is that they all go down together as a consequence sometimes of their managers or leadership not being willing to go, I'm going to make a hard decision now to preserve this company and to preserve the people who are here that I can preserve. And so that was extremely difficult.
Salmon have to overcome incredible odds to survive. Sometimes people can help. I led a research project on flow rates in a local stream. Working with research assistants from psychology and English opened my eyes to the complex relationship between science and public policy. Now, when I work with school kids at the UW hatchery, I tell them the whole story of salmon, forests, streams, and human habitation. Future generations, salmon, and people will benefit from our research.
It was a little intimidating at first, a sophomore working with so many PhDs. In the lab, I studied an infectious bacterium that is a major killer of people with HIV. I showed my data to Professor Cangelosi, and we realized I had made a new discovery.
Wow.
If this drug-resistant bacterium can be treated, people with HIV will have a better chance of surviving this infection. It's pretty overwhelming to think that I can have a part in helping millions of people.
Yeah, Alex, you stated earlier that you didn't see the internet going too much further in society and in the economic situations. And I was just wondering, don't you think that still there's so many people that haven't really got a chance to go on the internet and kind of expand their knowledge through that? And I was just kind of seeing what your take on that would be.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think, the internet history has just begun. We're at the dawn of a new era. This is the internet is the Model A, if you will, and it is composed of the exciting media of text and a bitmap. So when I look at the internet, I go, that primitive stone and chisel technology is not what the net is going to become, and it probably in no way resembles what it's really going to evolve to be and the experience people will be having. So, my perception is it will be wildly successful. This is a speed bump, and that all the stuff that's gone before will look back and go, what were those jokers doing? Yeah. And the net's going to look like something very different when it's done evolving, and I think it's going to reach everybody.
Okay, that's right. Well, what do you see that the internet's kind of going into right now at this point? Is it like gaming or?
Well, gaming is, like I said, when people talk to me, they go, well, you guys are a game technology company. No. It's like saying when you're in the movie industry, or it's like saying that when you're trying to explain what television is going to be like to somebody who's only ever seen a movie before, right? Television is the same media type, it's video, but the business models and the way people are going to watch it and the way people are going to pay for it will be completely different. There'll be half-hour episodes and 15-second Budweiser commercials and 1,000-hour Star Trek shows, and none of those models can exist in the television world. The net today is extremely constrained, and what I tell people is I go, forget the net, it's confusing. That's some crap that was made for Unix users, and they've cobbled some garbage on top of it and then kind of lost the idea where the vision is. And what you see is the real internet, in my opinion, cropping up around the browser, right? Because ICQ chat is a kind of browser. Email is another kind of browser. Real Networks player is another kind of browser. Flash or Shockwave is another kind of media type that's emerging online. So what you see is the kind of interactivity and kind of content delivery that people really want and people really want to experience the net as, but there isn't a way to bring it all together today. It hasn't all become a integrated solution. And I think that what you're going to see happening is you're going to see that emergence of something that's far richer, far more interactive, and I predict probably looks a lot more like the kind of things you see in a video game than looks like, a photograph or some text. And I think you're going to see that emerge over time, and that phenomenon is happening, very rapidly.
Okay, thanks. That's good.
From the perspective of a student that's in information systems, isn't an engineer, what is the value, from your perspective, of, say, taking the higher education approach in a classic education or the certification merry-go-round that seems to be very popular, or just get in and do?
Well, I have always I'm from a get in and do kind of background, but I have come to appreciate the value of a lot of different kinds of skill sets. I think that being in the IS department is a very tough job because it can be very thankless, because you're noticed most when things aren't going right, and people don't talk to you when everything's working fine. They're doing their jobs. And, certainly when I'm recruiting, I'm always looking for people who can just get it done. I'm looking for people who will solve the damn problem, and I don't care where they came from. However, what goes on the resume does increase the likelihood of getting that interview. So we find good people by two mechanisms. A resume comes in which case, if we're getting you by a resume, it's good to have that background and some experience, because that's what's going to get you in the door. If you're just good, then we're going to hear about you from a friend, and we're not going to care about the resume so much. That's how we're going to get you. And I would say that the majority of our recruiting comes from contacts. Not necessarily all companies are that way, but you know, the resume counts for if you just want to, if you're cold, getting a cold introduction. Otherwise, it's by association, in which case it's just, can you do the job? And some of the best people we have are people who, you know, guy was the IS department for, one of our engineers was an IS department and managed the computer systems for Nabisco, for Nestle, for French fry making. And he is one of the best programmers we have, most prolific, brilliant guy. And you never would have looked at anything on his resume and gone, he could do this job. And we didn't, when we hired him, we didn't expect him to. He just did. You know, so it's very interesting in that respect. So it's going to come to you, right? Who do you know? If you got friends and you can do the job, go get the job.
Right.
Right. If you don't, get the certification.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
The University of Washington Business School, located in Seattle, Washington, ranks among the top business schools in the United States. Information Technology Leaders is one of the many ways the UW Business School forges partnerships and reaches out beyond the university. For more information about the University of Washington Business School or Information Technology Leaders, visit informationtechnologyleaders.com.
When our students help me with research for these interviews, they ask our contact several questions. When asked, when you first met Alex, what was your impression of him? One contact responded, he was a large, wild, crazy man. When asked, how was that first impression carried through as you've gotten to know him better? She responded, he's a large, wild, crazy man with substance. She went on to say that he's an incredible visionary, but what makes him successful is his ability to sell an idea, to paint a picture so large and clear that you just have to be a part of it. Alex has this unique ability to make good people around him even better. He will give you his opinion and feedback, but at the end of the day, he wants and expects you to make the call. That kind of autonomy helps good people become great because it gives them self-confidence. He's got drive and perseverance. At 10 p.m., he started trying to convince Jeremy to quit his job at Harlequin and come to the United States to start WildTangent. It took all night, but by morning, Jeremy was on board, and so the quest continues. Alex, when I invite guests here, it's partly so that the students can learn about different careers, but it's also so they can meet people that they want to emulate. While you're an easy man to respect, I'm not terribly sure that you're an easy man to emulate, but I believe that we're all a bit richer and perhaps a bit bolder. Thank you so much for letting us share in the glow. Thank you very much.